Imagine waking up one morning and deciding to give the entire world a gift. Not a small gift, not something you can hold in your hands, but something so big, so powerful that it would change every single life on the planet. Something that would connect billions of people. Something that would make knowledge free for everyone. Now imagine giving that gift away for free. No money, no reward, no fame. Just because you believed the world deserved it. This is the true story of one man. A quiet man. A humble man. A man who changed the world from a small office in Switzerland. A man most people have never heard of. A man who perhaps deserves more gratitude than any other human being alive today. This is the story of Tim Berners-Lee, the man who invented the World Wide Web. Let us begin. Timothy John Berners-Lee was born on June 8, 1955, in London, England. The city was still recovering from the Second World War. Life was not easy, but the streets of London were full of hope. People were rebuilding, people were dreaming, and in a small house in southwest London, a baby boy came into the world who would one day rebuild the way all of us think, learn, and live. His parents were remarkable people. His father was Conway Berners-Lee. His mother was Mary Lee Woods. Both of them were mathematicians. Both of them worked on one of the very first computers ever built. The computer was called the Ferranti Mark I. It was enormous. It took up an entire room. It made loud noises. It required many people to operate it. But to his parents, it was magic. Tim grew up in a home where ideas were always welcome. His parents talked about numbers and logic at the dinner table. They talked about computers and mathematics like other families talked about football and the weather. For young Tim, this was completely normal. He did not know it yet, but this world of ideas was quietly shaping him into something extraordinary. Tim was a curious child. He loved to learn. He loved to explore. He spent hours reading books. He took things apart just to see how they worked. He asked questions all the time. Sometimes his questions made adults laugh. Sometimes his questions made adults think. But he always asked questions. That habit of asking questions would serve him very well one day. As a little boy, Tim discovered something that would fascinate him for the rest of his life. He discovered train sets, not just playing with them. He loved understanding how they worked. He studied the switches. He studied how the trains connected to different tracks. He studied how one small decision could send a train in a completely different direction. He spent hours thinking about connections, about systems, about how one thing led to another. He did not know it yet, but he was already thinking like the inventor he would become. Tim went to school in London. He was a bright student. He was not the loudest in the room. He was not the most popular. But his teachers noticed something special about him. He thought deeply. He thought carefully. He did not rush to give an answer. He sat with the problem until he truly understood it. He loved mathematics. He loved science. He loved the way logic worked. He loved the feeling of solving a problem. That feeling of a puzzle clicking into place gave him great satisfaction. When Tim was a teenager, something happened that would stay with him forever. He found an old book. The book was about an imaginary man named Minemone. This fictional character could remember everything. He could connect any piece of information to any other piece of information instantly. He could find links between ideas that seemed totally unrelated. Tim read this book and felt something stir inside him. He thought about the human brain. He thought about how the mind jumps from one idea to another. He thought about how a single thought can lead you to a memory, which leads you to a feeling, which leads you to another idea entirely. The mind did not work in straight lines. It worked in webs, in connections. In links, he began to wonder, what if a machine could do that too? What if information could be stored in a way that was connected, not just organized in rows and columns? What if you could jump from one piece of information to another the way the human mind does? He filed that thought away. He did not yet know what to do with it, but the seed had been planted. Tim worked hard through school and earned a place at Queen's College, Oxford University. For many young people, getting into Oxford is a dream come true. For Tim, it was simply the next step. He was not the kind of person who celebrated too long. He was always thinking about the next challenge. At Oxford, he studied physics. He loved the way physics made him think about the world differently. He loved the laws, the rules, the way everything in the universe followed patterns that could be discovered and understood. But alongside physics, he kept thinking about computers. He kept thinking about information. He kept thinking about connections. One story from his time at Oxford is particularly wonderful. Tim and a friend built their own computer. They built it using an old television, some spare parts, and a processor chip they bought cheaply. It was not a powerful machine. It was not impressive by any modern standard. But they built it with their own hands, from almost nothing. That experience taught Tim something very important. It taught him that if you understand how something works, you can build it yourself. You do not need to wait for someone else to do it for you. He graduated from Oxford in 1976 with a first class degree in physics. His future was wide open. He could go in many directions, but he already knew, deep in his heart, which direction he wanted to go. He wanted to work with computers. He wanted to work with information. He wanted to figure out how to make knowledge more free. After university, Tim began working in the technology industry. He took different jobs with different companies. He was learning, he was growing, he was collecting experiences like a traveler collects stamps in a passport. Every job taught him something new. Every challenge pushed him further. Then, in 1980, something important happened. Tim got a contract job at a place called CERN. CERN is a massive scientific research center located on the border between Switzerland and France. The full name is the European Organization for Nuclear Research. It is one of the largest and most respected scientific institutions in the world. Thousands of scientists from many different countries work there. They study some of the deepest questions in physics. They study atoms. They study the very building blocks of the universe. Tim was not there to study atoms. He was there to help with software. He was there to help manage information. And what he found at CERN gave him a problem, a very interesting problem, a problem that would change the world. The problem was this: CERN was enormous. There were thousands of people working there. They came from many different countries. They spoke many different languages. They worked in many different departments. They used many different computers. And all of those computers were different. They did not speak to each other easily. Information was scattered everywhere. If one scientist in one department discovered something important, it was very difficult for a scientist in another department to find out about it. Knowledge was trapped, knowledge was locked away in individual machines, in individual minds, in individual notebooks. People came and went at CERN. Scientists worked there for a while and then left. When they left, they took their knowledge with them. New people arrived and had to start learning everything from the beginning again. It was a constant problem. It was a frustrating problem. And Tim could see it clearly. He thought about it for a long time. He thought about the book he had read as a teenager. He thought about connections. He thought about the human brain and the way it linked ideas together. And he began to imagine a solution. He called it Inquire. It was a small software program, a very simple one. It allowed him to create connections between pieces of information on his own computer. He could write a document about one topic and link it to a document about another topic. Then he could click on the link and jump directly from one document to the other. It was like building a small web of information on his own computer. He showed it to a few colleagues. They found it useful. But it was still very small, very limited. It only worked on his own machine. And then his contract at CERN ended, and he had to move on. He left CERN. But he left something behind, a document, a small file, a record of this little program called Enquire. He thought he might need it again someday. He was right. Tim spent a few years working at other places. He worked for a company in Dorset, England. He continued to learn, he continued to think. But the problem he had seen at CERN never left his mind. It kept coming back to him, the way a dream comes back when you try to remember it in the morning. He kept thinking about information. He kept thinking about connections. He kept thinking about the world's knowledge and how hard it was to share. Libraries existed, but you had to go to them physically. Books existed, but they were expensive and sometimes hard to find. Knowledge existed, but it was not free. It was not easy to reach. It was locked behind doors that most people could not open. Tim believed this was wrong. He believed deeply and sincerely that knowledge belonged to everyone, not just to universities, not just to wealthy people, not just to scientists with access to big research centers. Everyone. Every person in every village in every corner of the world deserved access to the same knowledge. This belief was not just an intellectual idea for Tim. It came from something real inside him. It came from empathy. It came from imagining all the people in the world who had brilliant minds but no access to information. Imagine a young girl in a small village who could become a doctor if only she could read about medicine. Imagine a young man in a poor country who could become an engineer if only he could learn about mathematics. Imagine all that lost potential, all those closed doors, all those missed opportunities. Tim could not stop thinking about it. In 1984, he got another chance. CERN offered him a permanent fellowship. He came back, and this time he came with a mission. He returned to the same enormous, noisy, busy, brilliant institution. He returned to the same chaotic world of scattered information and disconnected computers. But this time, he was not just a visitor. He was there to solve the problem. He spent months thinking. He spent months reading. He spent months talking to colleagues and asking questions. He filled notebooks with ideas. He drew diagrams. He wrote equations. He imagined different solutions and then poked holes in them until they fell apart. Then he imagined better solutions. The key insight, the big idea that everything else would be built upon, came to him slowly and then all at once. He thought about hypertext. Hypertext was not a new idea. Other people had thought about it before. Hypertext meant text that was linked to other text, text that you could click on and be taken somewhere else, like a footnote but active, like a cross reference but instant. He also thought about the internet. The internet already existed in 1989, but it was not what we know today. It was a network of computers that could send messages to each other. It was used mainly by scientists and researchers and military organizations. It was technical, it was complicated. Ordinary people did not use it. Ordinary people barely knew it existed. Tim saw something that others had missed. He saw that these two ideas, hypertext and the internet, could be combined. If you took hypertext, the ability to link documents to each other, and you put it on top of the internet, the ability to connect computers all over the world, you would have something completely new, something revolutionary, something that no one had ever built before. You would have a world wide web of documents, all linked to each other, all accessible to anyone with a computer and a connection to the internet. He called it the World Wide Web. In March 1989, Tim Berners-Lee wrote a proposal, just a document, a few pages. He wrote it for his boss at CERN, a man named Mike Sandel. He explained the problem at CERN. He explained how information was getting lost. He explained his idea for a system of linked documents that could be accessed through the internet. He called his proposal information management. A proposal. He handed it to Mike Sandal and then he waited. Waiting is one of the hardest things in the world for a person with a big idea. When you can see so clearly what could be and you are just waiting for someone else to say yes, time moves very slowly. Tim was patient, but inside he was burning with the desire to begin. Mike Sendall read the proposal. He thought about it. And then he wrote something on the front page of Tim's document. He wrote three words that Tim would never forget. He wrote, vague but exciting. It was not a ringing endorsement. It was not a firm yes. But it was not a no. It was an open door, a small one. But enough Tim walked through it. He began working on the idea with a colleague named Robert Kaliau, a Belgian computer scientist who became one of Tim's most important partners in those early years. Robert believed in the idea. Robert helped to push for it. Together, they refined the proposal and presented it again to CERN in 1990. This time, CERN gave them some resources. Not a lot, but enough to begin. Tim worked with tremendous focus and energy. He was building something that had never existed before. That meant every single step was uncertain. Every single decision was new. There was no manual to follow. There was no expert to ask. He was writing the manual himself. He created three essential technologies, three things that made the World Wide Web work. The first was HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. This was the language used to write web pages. It was a simple language. It told the computer how to display information, how to make text bold, how to create headings, how to add links. The second was HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This was the system that allowed documents to be sent from one computer to another over the internet. It was the invisible road that information traveled on. The third was URL, Uniform Resource Locator. This was the address system. Each document on the web got its own unique address. Just like a house has a street address, each web page had a URL. This meant you could find any document on any computer in the world, as long as you knew its address .ml, HTTP, URL. These three inventions together created the World Wide Web. He also built the first web browser, a program that allowed people to read web pages. He also built the first web server, a computer that stored web pages and sent them to people who asked for them. On December 25, 1990, Tim Berners-Lee made the first successful communication between a web browser and a web server. On Christmas Day 1990, the World Wide Web made its first true connection. He then built the first website in history. It was a very simple page. It contained information about the World Wide Web itself. It explained what it was and how it worked. The address of this first website was info.cern.ch. You can still visit a version of it today. It is the oldest website in the world. And then Tim Berners-Lee did something that no one expected. Something that shocked some people. Something that even his colleagues at CERN found difficult to understand at first. He gave it away. Think about what he had. He had invented something completely new, something that had never existed before, something that, even in those early days, he could see had almost unlimited potential. He could have patented it, he could have owned it, he could have charged companies and governments and universities to use it. He could have become one of the richest people who ever lived. He knew this, he chose not to do it. In 1993, Tim and CERN announced that the World Wide Web technology would be free. Anyone could use it, anyone could build on it, anyone could create websites without paying a fee. The technology was open, it belonged to no one, it belonged to everyone. Tim explained his thinking simply. He said that if the web had belonged to one company, it would not have grown the way it did. If people had to pay to use it, it would have stayed small. It would have been used only by the rich and the powerful. And that was exactly the opposite of what Tim wanted. He wanted a web that was for everyone, for the scientist and the student, for the factory worker and the farmer, for the grandmother in England and the teenager in Kenya, for the child in Brazil and the teacher in Japan, for everyone, everywhere, equally. He gave up billions of dollars. He gave up enormous power. He did it willingly. He did it gladly. And he has never regretted it. The web grew slowly at first. In 1991, a few hundred people used it. Most of them were scientists. Most of them were at universities or research centers. Ordinary people still did not know it existed. But the web had a wonderful quality. It grew itself. Every new website made the web more valuable. Every new user made it more useful. Every connection created more connections. It was like a snowball rolling down a hill, picking up more snow with every rotation, getting bigger and faster all the time. By 1993, there were several hundred websites. By 1994, there were thousands. By 1995, millions of people around the world were using the web. By 2000, it had become part of everyday life for hundreds of millions. By today, it connects more than 5 billion people. 5 billion people. Tim Berners-Lee connected 5 billion human beings. But let us step back. Let us not get too far ahead of ourselves. Because in those early days, the journey was not easy. There were doubts, there were problems, there were moments of fear. When Tim first proposed the web, many people did not understand it. Some people at CERN thought it was an interesting idea, but not worth pursuing seriously. Some people thought the internet was already good enough for what scientists needed. Some people simply could not imagine what Tim could imagine. This is something that happens to almost every great inventor. The thing about seeing the future is that other people cannot see it yet. You are standing on a hill, looking at a magnificent view, and you try to describe it to someone who is still in the valley. You try your best, but they just cannot quite see what you see. Not yet, Tim kept going anyway. He believed in his idea because he understood it deeply. He had thought about it from every angle. He had tested it. He had questioned it. And he was confident, not arrogant, not loud, just quietly, firmly confident that this was the right path. That quiet confidence is one of the most important things about Tim Berners-Lee. He did not need the world to cheer for him. He did not need headlines or trophies. He just needed to keep working. He just needed to keep building. One line of code at a time, one connection at a time. There is a conversation that Tim had with his father many years later that is worth thinking about. His father had also been a visionary thinker. His father had worked on early computers and had spent his own career imagining what those machines could one day become. Tim asked his father once what he thought about the web. His father was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "I always knew you would find a way," his father said. "Your mind was always looking for the connections that others missed." Tim was moved by those words. He thought about all the years of dinner table conversations about mathematics and computers. He thought about how his parents had, without even realizing it, given him the greatest gift a parent can give a child. They had given him a world where curiosity was celebrated, where questions were welcomed, where the desire to understand was treated as something precious. He thought about how much of who he had become was shaped by those early years in a small house in London, surrounded by parents who loved ideas. And he thought, not for the first time, about how important it is what we give to our children. Not money, not things, but ideas, wonder, the courage to imagine. As the web grew through the 1990s, new challenges appeared. Tim watched with a mixture of pride and concern as the web transformed. He watched companies build businesses on it. He watched new forms of communication emerge. He watched people connect with each other across oceans and continents and cultures. He also watched problems emerge. He watched misinformation spread. He watched people use the web for things that disturbed him. He watched privacy being eroded. He watched the open, free, equal web he had imagined becoming something more complicated, more commercial, more unequal in certain ways. Tim never stopped caring about the web. He never stepped back and said, "My job is done." He became a fierce advocate for keeping the web open, for protecting it, for improving it. In 1994, he founded an organization called the World Wide Web Consortium, often called W3C. This organization's job was to develop standards for the web, to make sure the web worked the same way for everyone, to keep it open, to keep it free, to make sure no single company or government could control it. He still leads the W3C and other organizations focused on keeping the web healthy. He still fights for the open web every single day. He still believes that the web can be better than it currently is. He still dreams of a world where the web truly fulfills its original promise of connecting all of humanity equally. That is the mark of a truly great person. Not just that they built something important, but that they cared about what it became, that they kept fighting for it even when the fight was hard. Let us take a moment and think about what the world was like before the web. Before the web, if you wanted to find information, you had to go to a library. If the library did not have the book you needed, you were out of luck. If the book was checked out, you had to wait. If you lived in a small town with a small library, your access to knowledge was very limited. Before the web, if you wanted to contact someone far away, you wrote a letter and waited days or weeks for a reply. Or you made an expensive phone call. Before the web, if you wanted to start a business, you needed a physical shop. You needed to be in a city. You needed to reach customers who could physically come to you. Before the web, if you wanted to learn something new, you needed a school, you needed a teacher, you needed textbooks, you needed money to pay for all of it. The web did not just make these things faster and easier. The web changed what was possible. The web put the world's knowledge into the hands of a person with a basic computer and an internet connection. The web allowed a teenager in a small village to learn the same things as a student at a prestigious university. The web allowed a small business in a developing country to sell products to customers in wealthy nations. The web allowed a doctor in a remote area to consult with specialists in the best hospitals in the world. The web did not solve all the world's problems. Inequality still exists. Access is still not equal everywhere. There are still billions of people without reliable internet. And Tim knows this and grieves over it. But the web opened doors that were previously locked forever. And the man who opened those doors chose to give the key to everyone. There is a moment that many people do not know about, a moment that reveals the true character of Tim Berners-Lee, perhaps better than any award or honor ever could. In 2012, the Summer Olympics were held in London. It was a homecoming of sorts for Tim. This was his city. These were his streets. And the organizers of the Olympic opening ceremony decided to include a tribute to the World Wide Web during the spectacular opening ceremony, watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. A special moment was dedicated to Tim. He appeared live during the ceremony, sitting at a computer. On the screens above him, a message appeared. It was simple, just a few words. This is for everyone. And the crowd in the stadium cheered. Tim sat there at his computer, typing. A quiet man in a big moment, not performing, not showing off, just there, just himself. A man who had given the world something extraordinary and had never asked for anything in return. This is for everyone. Those four words perfectly captured everything Tim Berners-Lee had ever believed and worked for. The web was not for the rich. It was not for the powerful. It was not for the educated or the privileged. It was for everyone. Every single human being on this planet. When Tim was asked later how he felt during that moment, his answer was characteristic of him. He said he was a little nervous. He said he hoped the computer would not crash. He made people laugh, and then he made them think. People sometimes ask Tim if he regrets not making money from the web. This is a question he has been asked hundreds of times in interviews and public appearances, and his answer is always consistent. He does not regret it. He says that the web could not have become what it became if it had been owned by one company. He says that the open nature of the web is precisely what made it so powerful. He says that if every website had to pay a fee to exist, most of them would never have been created. The explosion of creativity and connection that the web enabled was only possible because it was free. He also says something else, something deeply personal. He says that money was never what motivated him. Knowledge was what motivated him. The idea of connecting people was what motivated him. The vision of a world where everyone could learn and share and contribute. That was what got him out of bed every morning. That was what kept him working through the difficult days and the uncertain moments. Not the thought of what he might earn, but the thought of what the world might become. And looking at the world today, looking at the 5 billion people connected to the web, looking at the students learning online and the doctors sharing research and the artists reaching audiences they never could have reached otherwise, it is very hard to argue with his choice. Tim Berners-Lee has received many honors and awards throughout his career. In 2004, Queen Elizabeth II honored him with a knighthood. He became Sir Timothy Berners-Lee. He was named one of Time magazine's 100 most important people of the 20th century. He has received honorary degrees from dozens of universities around the world. He has been praised by presidents and prime ministers and scientists and philosophers. He accepts these honors graciously, but he does not dwell on them. He is always looking forward. He is always thinking about the next problem, the next challenge, the next way to make the web better. In recent years, Tim has been deeply concerned about what he calls the dice function of the web. He is concerned about misinformation. He is concerned about data privacy. He is concerned about the way large technology companies have collected enormous amounts of personal data from users without their full understanding or consent. He has proposed new ideas to address these problems. He has worked on a project called Solid, which aims to give people back control of their own data. He believes that your personal information should belong to you, not to the companies that collected it. He believes the web should return to its original vision of empowering individuals, not corporations. He has not stopped fighting, even after decades, even after achieving what most people would consider a legacy complete enough for several lifetimes. He is still there, still working, still believing that a better web is possible, still pushing for a more equal, more open, more human world. There is a story that Tim tells sometimes about the early days of the web, about a time when he was feeling discouraged. It was in the early 1990s. The web existed. It was technically working, but it was growing slowly, very slowly. Tim had imagined a world where millions of people would connect through this system. But in those early months, only a tiny number of people were using it. Only a handful of websites existed. The servers were slow and unreliable. Many people who tried to use the web early on gave up because it was too complicated. Tim sat in his office at CERN and looked at the numbers. He felt a familiar feeling, a quiet, cold fear. The fear that perhaps he had been wrong, that perhaps the idea was not as powerful as he had believed, that perhaps the world was not ready for it, that perhaps it would remain a small tool used only by a few scientists and nothing more. He had given everything to this idea. He had worked on it for years. He had convinced colleagues and managers to support it. He had poured his talent and his energy and his vision into it. And now, looking at the slow growth, he wondered. He went for a walk. This was something Tim often did when he needed to think. He walked through the grounds near CERN, with the Swiss Alps in the distance and the cool air clearing his head. He walked and he thought, and as he walked, he thought about why he had started. Not about whether the web would succeed commercially, not about whether people would use it, but about the original vision, the original dream. The web was still technically capable of everything he had imagined. The technology worked, the idea was sound, the path was still there. It was just that not enough people had found it yet. He decided to keep going, not because he was certain it would succeed, but because he was certain the idea was right. And that was enough. He came back to his office. He sat down. He kept working, and the web kept growing. One of the most beautiful things about Tim's story is how it illustrates the relationship between vision and patience. We live in a world that celebrates instant success. We love stories of overnight victories. We are amazed by things that happen fast. But the truly great things, the things that last, the things that genuinely change the world, they almost always take time. Tim spent years developing his ideas before he even wrote his first proposal. He spent years working at CERN before the web began to grow. He spent years advocating for open standards before the web became the global phenomenon we know today. And he has spent decades since fighting to keep the web healthy and free. None of this happened quickly. None of it was easy. None of it was certain. But Tim believed. And Tim kept going. And the world was changed. If Tim had given up when the web was growing slowly, you would not be able to read this today. If Tim had listened to every person who did not understand his vision, the web might never have existed. If Tim had let fear or doubt or impatience stop him, billions of people would live in a darker, more isolated, more unequal world. The lesson is not complicated, but it is important. Do not stop too soon. Do not give up just because something is hard or slow. If your idea is good, if your purpose is true, if your vision is clear, keep going, keep working, keep believing. The world needs people who do not give up. Tim Berners-Lee has spoken often about the role of his family in his life and work. He has been married and has children who have grown up in the remarkable shadow of their father's achievement. But Tim is careful to say that he does not want his children to live in shadows. He wants them to find their own light. He has said that the most important thing he has tried to give his children is what his own parents gave him: the love of ideas, the habit of curiosity, the belief that the world is full of problems waiting to be solved by people willing to think hard and work long. He has also talked about failure, about his own mistakes and misjudgments. He has spoken publicly about things he wishes he had done differently with the web, about ways in which the early design could have been better, about features he did not build that he later wished he had. He does not try to hide these things. He does not pretend to be perfect. He says that failure is part of the process, that every failure teaches you something, that every mistake is an opportunity to understand something you did not understand before. This honesty and humility is part of what makes Tim so admirable. He is not a man who claims to have all the answers. He is a man who keeps asking questions, even now, even at this stage of his remarkable life. Consider for a moment the sheer scale of what Tim created. Imagine you are standing in the center of London. You look up and see the sky. Now imagine that every person in every country in the world is connected to you by a single invisible thread. Not just connected, but able to speak to you, able to share with you, able to learn from you and teach you, able to show you their world and see yours. That is what the web is. That is what Tim built. The web contains more information than exists in every library ever built. The web has enabled more forms of human connection than any previous technology. The web has created industries and destroyed industries. It has created entirely new forms of art and communication and commerce. It has allowed social movements to organize across borders. It has allowed science to progress faster because researchers can share findings instantly. It has allowed families separated by oceans to stay close. It has allowed people who feel alone to find others like themselves. It has allowed voices that were once silenced to be heard. And all of this came from the mind of one quiet man, one man who sat in a small office in Switzerland, one man who wrote a proposal that his boss described as vague but exciting, one man who chose to give his greatest creation to the world for free because he believed with every fiber of his being that knowledge and connection were human rights and not products to be sold. There is a younger generation of people today who are building on what Tim created. They are building apps and platforms and technologies that Tim could not have imagined when he first wrote his proposal in 1989. They are solving problems that Tim never encountered. They are creating things that will change the world in ways we cannot yet fully see. And Tim looks at this and feels, he has said, a kind of joy that is very hard to describe. The joy of a person who planted a seed and has lived to see a forest grow. The joy of a person who opened a door and watched the whole world walk through it. He hopes that these young builders will carry forward the values he tried to build into the web from the beginning: openness, equality, freedom. He hopes they will resist the temptation to close off, to restrict, to control. He hopes they will remember why the web became what it became, not because someone owned it, but because no one did. He has spoken at universities and schools and conferences to share this message with the next generation. He speaks not as an authority commanding obedience, but as a fellow traveler sharing what he has learned. He speaks with warmth and honesty and humor. He speaks like someone who genuinely wants the people listening to go out and build something wonderful, and many of them do. There is a quality that the greatest human beings share: not intelligence alone, not talent alone, not even hard work alone, but a combination of all these things joined together by something else, something harder to define. Call it purpose, call it heart, call it the willingness to care about something bigger than yourself. Tim Berners-Lee cared about something bigger than himself. He cared about humanity. He cared about knowledge. He cared about equality. He cared about what the world could become if only the right connections could be made between the right minds. And so he made those connections. He built the web that connects us all. And then he gave it away because he understood that its true value could only be realized if it belonged to everyone. That is not just a technical achievement, that is a moral achievement, a spiritual achievement, an act of profound generosity that deserves to be remembered alongside the greatest acts of generosity in human history. We are now living in a world that Tim Berners-Lee helped to build. Every time you search for information online, he is there. Every time you send a message to a friend in another country, he is there. Every time you read the news or watch a video or learn something new from a website, he is there. Every time a student in a developing country accesses educational materials they could not otherwise afford, he is there. Every time a small business reaches a global customer, he is there. He is there in the architecture of the web itself, in the code he wrote, in the standards he set, in the decisions he made decades ago that still shape how the web works today. He is there in the idea that the web should be open, that it should be free, that it should serve all of humanity equally. And he is still there in the very real and present sense, still working, still fighting, still believing, still pushing for a web that lives up to its original promise. If you are young and you are listening to this story, perhaps you are feeling something right now. Perhaps you are feeling a spark of something. Perhaps you are thinking about your own ideas, your own dreams, your own vision of what the world could become. If you are, then this story has done its job because Tim Berners-Lee was not a superhero. He was not born with special powers. He was not extraordinarily lucky. He was a curious child who asked too many questions. He was a student who built a computer from spare parts. He was a young man who saw a problem that everyone else accepted and decided that he would not accept it. He had doubts. He had difficult days. He had moments when he wondered if his idea was good enough. He had moments when the world did not believe what he believed. He kept going anyway. And the world was changed. You can do the same. Not necessarily by inventing the web already exists, but by finding the problem that only you can see, by developing the solution that only you can imagine, by having the courage to keep going when it is hard, and by having the generosity to share what you create with the world rather than hoarding it for yourself. The world is full of problems waiting to be solved. The world is full of doors waiting to be opened. The world is full of connections waiting to be made. What will you build? Tim Berners-Lee sits at his desk today, just as he sat at a desk at CERN more than 30 years ago. The desk is different. The computer is different. The problems he is working on are different. But the spirit is the same. The curiosity is the same. The belief that the world can be better is the same. He is not a man who looks back with satisfaction and rests. He is a man who looks forward with determination and works. He knows that the web he built is not finished. He knows that the vision he had in 1989 has not yet been fully realized. He knows there is more to do, and so he does it every day, quickly, persistently, humbly. The man who gave the world a gift is still at work, making sure the gift is everything he promised it would be. Let us end where we began. With a gift, imagine giving the entire world a gift, something so big, so powerful, that it would change every single life on the planet, something that would connect billions of people, something that would make knowledge free for everyone. Now imagine giving that gift away for free because you believed the world deserved it. Tim Berners-Lee did not just imagine this. He did it, and because he did it, you can learn, you can connect, you can grow, you can share, you can build, you can reach across the world and touch the life of someone you have never met, in a country you have never visited, speaking a language you do not know. You can do all of this because one man sat in a small office in Switzerland and refused to accept the world as it was. Because one man believed, stubbornly and passionately, and with great love for humanity, that the world could be better. Tim Berners-Lee believed in you. He believed in all of us. Long before most of us were even using a computer. Long before most of us could imagine what the web would become. He believed that every person deserved access to knowledge. Every person deserved connection. Every person deserved a seat at the table of human progress. He built that table. He set a place for all of us. And then he stepped back and let us sit down. Thank you, Tim. From every student who ever learned something online, from every family that ever connected across a distance, from every artist who ever found an audience, from every scientist who ever shared a discovery, from every small business owner who ever found a global customer, from every lonely person who ever found a community, from every person who ever typed a question into a search engine and found an answer, from all 5 billion of us. Thank you. Moral of the story. True greatness is not measured by what you gain, but by what you give. Tim Berners-Lee had the power to own the world's greatest invention and chose instead to give it to the world for free. He teaches us that the deepest purpose of talent is not to enrich ourselves, but to lift others, build something meaningful, share it generously, and never stop believing that the world can be better than it is today.